blocker of Hextall. Fed around to the far side. Flyers a little lax in picking up Robinson, who puts it cross ice off the body. Breakaway Eklund. He's gone for the hat trick. He's in. Shot. Score. Hat trick, Pelly Eklund. That for Philadelphia in their history is their 12th playoff hat trick, and the other one this year, Tim Kerr against the Islanders in the first game of that set.
Everybody, it's Isaiah, just reminding you that FlyersNittyGritty.com and the O&B Puckcast are brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. Hey, do you have damage to your home? Not sure who to call? We suggest that you call Summit Public Adjusters before your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be very stressful. Let Summit take the stress out of the claims process. From storm damage to your roof, to toilet overflows, to broken pipes and fires, Summit gets you the most money for your repairs. So next time Mother Nature leaves you in need of repairs, call Summit Public Adjusters at 215-752-0560 or visit summitpublicadjusters.com. Licensed in PA and New Jersey.
And we are back. It is Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode number 131. The Flyers are kind of halfway through their exhibition schedule. 3 down, 3 to go. And before you know it, we'll turn around. It'll be October 15th, and they'll be opening at home versus the Vancouver Canucks, a very interesting team. But there's a lot to talk about before we even get there. Just a note, Chef B may join us tonight. He had to go out on an emergency call. Everybody's okay. It's just the business he's in. But we are, of course, joined by the great Dan Silver. How are you, Dan?
Hey, I'm good, Isaiah. How's it going with you?
All right. So we were saying before the show, the Flyers showed us a little leg last night. So they got us a little preview, showing us a little bit what they can do when you put these pieces together. There's still a lot more to learn, and we have to play real games before we find out what they really are. And to help us figure all of that out is a guy who was with us before, a great show that we did. He's the Flyers insider for 97.3 ESPN. He's the editor at Flyerdelphia, also a co-host of the You Would Think podcast. Busy man. But you know him as Kevin Durso. How are you?
I'm doing well, guys. How are you?
Great to have you aboard. So it seemed like most of the new Flyers had some standout moments last night. So after 3 exhibition games and camp and everything, where do you think they stand?
Well, these new guys are really starting to stand out in the game specifically. I mean, from the very beginning, and Tuesday was the first exhibition game. You're not expecting a whole lot, and I thought Ryan Ellis just balanced out Ivan Provorov so well. It's a smooth pairing, just all over the place. Ellis made a particular play in the game on Saturday night that it's just as professional as it gets. It really is just that smooth play, that reliable play, as steady as they come. So he looks great with Provorov. I think that there's no worries about that pairing at all. Obviously, Rasmus Ristolainen was kind of the big question mark out of all of these acquisitions, really. And, that first game for him on Thursday night in Boston, it's a little bit unfair to judge guys in games like that when you're playing so many of the regulars on the other side. I mean, they had him as the top pairing guy, basically, when that's not the role he's going to play in the regular season. And I thought we saw more of what he can be in Saturday's game against Washington. The physical side of things, coming in to defend teammates was a big part of it as well. Sticking to the blue line, I'll go to Keith Yandel next, I guess, and I've liked the way he's played as well. I think he's been better than expected, to be honest. I think he's very smooth skating-wise and moving the puck. He's been better defensively than I probably expected. I'm not saying I'm going to expect him to be a Norris candidate or anything crazy like that, but I think he is better than what I thought he was going to be in terms of reliability in his own zone, when I kind of thought he was going to be this offensive specialist, a guy you would deploy specifically for special teams and limit his minutes at 5-on-5. I feel better with him on the ice than I expected. And up front, you got I think we kind of had an expectation for Cam Atkinson, and Atkinson has this energy level about him and this speed factor and the willingness to shoot the puck, and we saw it in both games he's played so far. But I'll tell you, I've been really impressed by Derek Brassard. I think that he's been noticeable in these first 2 games he's played, much more than I expected. Him coming to the aid of Ivan Provorov in Saturday's game was a huge standout moment for him because it shows what kind of player he can be. So I'm really impressed by these new guys. And then I guess to top it all off, going in goal, Martin Jones getting the last 2 starts, playing the full game on Saturday. And that first game for Jones, it was unfortunate that he didn't get to see much more in the second period, as he may have settled in. The first period, by the stats, it's not very good, obviously. He gives up 3 goals. The first 2, I would say, not really his fault when you're looking at the way the penalty kill was and who they were playing against on the opposing power play. But that third one, even with a little bit of a deflection, I thought that he probably could have made a save there. Really liked his game on Saturday, though. I thought that his game on Saturday against Washington, after giving up an early goal again, he really settled in and he looked sharp going down the stretch there. And I think that that's the guy you want to see in goal whenever you have to play him, whenever you feel the need to give Carter Hart a break and put Martin Jones in. That's the guy you want to see.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a really good capsule summary. And you think about some of the players that are getting special attention right now. Of course, we all know about the Flyers' injury situation. Players like Kevin Hayes and Sam Moran and some of the younger kids are out, and we can kind of speak to that a little bit later. But really getting a lot of attention is Morgan Frost. And you wondered in his first appearance if he was a little bit overwhelmed, nervous. Really played like 4 periods of hockey in 18 or 19 months. A little bit better last night. AV wants a little more. That's a pretty critical position right now with Kevin Hayes out for, about 4 to 6 weeks.
It definitely is. And I think I agree with you guys. I think that he took a big step in the right direction in that Saturday game. Thursday was, having to play against that top line of Boston and be that guy. That's not fair to him either in his first game action in quite some time. And I get he's had the rookie games and things like that, but he really was getting a taste of the NHL life again with that game. And it's really not fair to him to put him in that spot and say, well, let's evaluate your entire progress based on that one game. I thought that he was much better in that game on Saturday and showed more confidence, I think, is really the key to this. He needs to play with that kind of confidence. He can't just kind of try to sit back and let the game come to him as much, because I think he'll be caught flat-footed if he does. When he's actually trying to take control of the game, you see more of the flashes of what he can do. He had a couple of nice lead passes that set up scoring chances, was better in his defensive end as well. So you kind of got the combination there. He's still got things he could work on. I think he does, kind of in line with what Alain Vigneault said after the game, shows flashes at times. I didn't think it was that much of a dismissal like AV kind of gave, where he kind of downplayed it a little bit. I think you could have boosted him a little bit more than what he had said, but I think that all in all, you're seeing exactly that. He's not going to take the place of Kevin Hayes, but he's going to have to try his best to not only fill that void that the team has, but try to make himself stand out so that when Kevin Hayes does come back, that he's still around and he's still playing as part of this team.
Yeah. In fact, it's something Dan and I had spoken to with the amount of pressure that's on a young player to be defensively responsible at the center position in the NHL. He may see some time at wing if he proves he can cut it overall. I mean, that's something that was on my mind at least.
It's very possible. And I think to an extent, too, one of the things that I look at anyway is, at least for the first couple of preseason games, and it was a little, we didn't get the full lineup until that Saturday game pretty much. And to see these two, I kind of can't differentiate through the practices, through training camp sessions, through even the first couple preseason games, who's the second line and who's the third line. I feel like I have a better grasp of it as it goes on. I think that Frost is really just kind of a direct placement for Kevin Hayes, and that's the line that we would classify as the second. But for the little while early on in camp, I kind of thought that maybe they were kind of boosting the Derek Brassard's line with with Cam Atkinson on that line and things like that. And maybe they were trying to boost those guys a little bit because the experience level was higher and giving Frost a little bit more of a sheltered role as a third line guy. I'm not so sure now. I think it's more of a direct replacement, but still, you're going to have a spot open for him potentially if you consider where we kind of all assumed Wade Allison would be, because he was starting to show signs he was going to make a run in camp before that injury. So that's kind of where he could slot in, and that's kind of goes to your point about how he could be a fit on the wing just as much as he is at center, especially if it does become too much of a responsibility in the early going to be that defensive guy like the center is supposed to be.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And Brassard's an interesting case. When they signed him, I thought to myself, well, he's this year's Val Filppula. But obviously he's off to a better start than that, and his savvy, his veteran kind of guile, and like you talk about sticking up for Provorov, probably not really necessary, but still trying to establish a tenor culturally in and out of the locker room as well, not just on the ice. And he's looked impressive and very comfortable with Lindblom and Cam Atkinson.
He really has. I mean, that line has impressed me throughout camp to begin with anyway. And I think I tweeted it out from one of the practices I was at last weekend. They ran a 2-on-1 drill, and he's with Cam Atkinson, who he played with in Columbus. And they just seem to have instant chemistry whatever they try to do, whatever drill it is, they seem to have great chemistry. So I think that's certainly why you put them together. And certainly when you consider that Oscar Lindblom looks back to full strength as much as everything else lines up with him being back to full strength, I think that's really a big part of it too, that you get a formidable line. And I know that the contract that Brassard signed and maybe the timing of it too kind of makes it seem like this is not really a significant signing by any stretch because of the fact that it came so late. It's maybe a guy who you think could step in when needed, maybe the type of guy you signed to be your 13th almost in a way. And instead, I think he's actually solidifying himself as a key part of this lineup potentially, especially if he continues to show the energy level, show the commitment to being there for the rest of the team, and just the overall level of play he showed so far, because the veteran status that he has and the experience he has is really showing through in these first few games, and it's certainly seems like it could be rubbing off on the rest of the team as well.
Yeah, and speaking to Yandel, I mean, I think one of the things that you put Yandel in a good spot with a savvy veteran like Justin Braun, probably the Flyers' most consistent defenseman last year, and he kind of knows where Braun's always going to be. These guys know the game; they know how to play, especially a guy with a streak like Yandel does, and he's fit in very well. And you know what? He's like a more mature version of Ghost on that power play. He makes better decisions. He's great with the keeps in the zone on the power play. And it's just definitely a catalyst back there and a breath of fresh air personality-wise as well.
Yeah, you know, when Kevin Hayes was here, first came here, and we got all those videos of him being the goofball that he is, I really didn't think there was anybody out there that could top him. And yeah, Keith Yandel can top him for sure. He's a great personality, and I really do like the fit on the power play. You know, he's not necessarily kind of in a different way from Shane Gostisbehere. He's not necessarily a guy who's going to always try to get that shot through. I think we always could kind of tell when they were telegraphing that Gostisbehere was going to wind up for that one-timer or whatever. He really just focuses on moving the puck around and getting it to the right guy who may have the open lane for the shot. He's much more of an assist guy on the power play than he is the shot guy, and that's a big part of it too. And we have seen that so far. I mean, he got his first assist with the Flyers so far in the preseason with that keep in at the blue line that helped set up Claude Giroux's goal on the power play, which, I mean, that shot by Giroux also is very vintage Claude Giroux in that sense, where you get him on that side where the one-timer's available, and if he's able to really unleash it like that, and I certainly hope that that's the case throughout the season. I hope that there's more guys that you can put out on the power play at this point that you can feel like have enough of a threat to shoot the puck and maybe get some traffic to the net or whatever, that it opens up Giroux more for that one-timer, because Yandel's going to be looking for that sometimes. He's going to be out there trying to find the open guy, find the right setup, and try to make that work for the power play and create some success for it, instead of just talking about generating good zone time or passing around the perimeter a lot and having possession. Trying to talk about actually setting guys up and getting pucks to the net like they should, and seeing where that can go with that power play. But he is definitely, he's impressed me in all areas, really. He's not just the specialist. He's done well on that pairing with Braun as well. But certainly the main focus for him and kind of the reason he was brought in here is because of the fact that I called him at the time of the signing, he's an insurance policy for Cam York, that if Cam York wasn't the standout guy in training camp, and he kind of hasn't been to this point. I think he could use the most of the year at the AHL level to kind of start to build himself up and get used to the pace and get used to that level of play. That this is what you can put out there for now, and it's not going to hurt you in any way because the experience level and his ability to move the puck is going to be on par with, I think, what you hope that Cam York turns into, especially if you have hopes for him to join the team at some point mid-season potentially. But I think that it's kind of the best of both worlds. Yandel gets to play and gets to chase after this streak, which, he might say it's not as important to chase the streak. He just wants to try to win and have success in the league and all that type of stuff. But I think it gives you the opportunity to play him in a role that fits him, where he's got the experience level, and York gets to play valuable minutes at the AHL level where he gets to be basically the top guy and the first guy you would expect to be called up when the time comes. And I think that's a fit for all sides.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to plug those pieces in and not push the kids. We saw that last year, and just, it was a little bit too much too soon, and we saw the results. So, Dan, let me get you in here because I know you got a lot that you wanted to comment about. There's so many things.
So one of the things that Kevin talked about, for me, the best moment of the game last night was, when Hathaway takes the run at Provorov. And if I tweeted out a replay of it where you can very clearly see what happened. I mean, he tried to take Ivan's head off with a high elbow. Like, it was a very dirty play, and Provorov just backed out of it at the last moment, thankfully. And then he just buried him with a fist to the face, and Hathaway, fell down. Hathaway gets up and goes right after Provorov. Now, look, Ivan Provorov, like, him and Mikhail Sergachev are like boxing partners in the offseason. I'm sure he can handle himself in a fight, but the Flyers don't want Ivan Provorov in a fight. He's their biggest minute eater defenseman. So Derek Brassard comes flying in. He's the third man into the fight. I can't believe he didn't get a penalty on the play, but he comes in, he breaks it up, and that was a great moment because that didn't happen last year. Earlier in the game, Rasmus Ristolainen just buries a couple guys near the Flyers bench. That kind of stuff didn't really happen last year. And, last year you see the Flyers have a game against the Rangers where they lose 9-0. There's no response from anyone. At any point in the game, there's no response from anyone. I was so disgusted to be a Flyers fan watching that game, and I'm sure that Chuck Fletcher had the same exact thoughts going through his mind, which is what we've talked about ad nauseum. That's the bigger reason for a lot of these guys being brought in is on the ice, but I think it's more so off the ice. And that's what we saw in the game yesterday. And this team may not win the Stanley Cup. They may not win a playoff round, but they're not going to give up like they gave up last year. And for me, that's a big deal as a Flyers fan, as someone who supports this team. That's a big deal to me. So that was kind of my takeaway from last night. Was really nice to see. And like they put their starting night roster out there last night. The Caps didn't. But they went out there and they scored some nice goals. The Giroux goal, the Lawton goal is really nice. I like seeing Morgan Frost bury one in the shootout, which they're doing at the end of all these games. Atkinson getting on the board was great. So, So for me, that was the big takeaway, was kind of the physicality and Brassard and Ristolainen kind of showing that off.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many things in there, Kevin. Anything that stood out for you in that regard? Because Dan's kind of hitting it from a different angle.
Yeah, no, I mean, that sounds a lot like some of my takeaways from my 5 takeaways article on 97.3 ESPN.com this morning, to be honest. I mean, the physical play was a great sign because you just kind of got the sense right away that it's a different feeling. And to be honest, we can talk all we want to about Ristolainen being that physical guy and how he's the newcomer who adds that presence. But the first big hit of the game was actually Travis Konechny. He makes a nice hit along the boards right in front of the Flyers bench, and you're kind of already, your eyes are a little wide going, okay, that's different. That's something that wasn't there for the last 2.5, 3 months of last season. And then you start to watch Ristolainen do his thing and go out there. I think Ristolainen had 4 hits in the first period. He finished the game with only 5 when you consider it like that, but 4 in the first period and kind of set the tone right away. And to talk about what Brassard did on everything with Provorov and Provorov getting involved with Hathaway like that, which, yes, by the way, first and foremost, it was certainly a dirty play to try to take a run like that at a guy, especially in a preseason game. And I kind of equated that too as I watched the replay of it. When Hathaway gets up, his helmet's off, and he just drops the gloves right away. So I'm like, he knew what he was doing there. He knew what he was trying to get out of them by trying to make an attempt on a hit like that. And I'll agree, I was very surprised Brassard didn't get anything on that, because it was, we all were kind of wondering upstairs what just happened, that he's not in the box. We actually kind of assumed at the beginning, because he went to the box anyway by himself without finding out, without assuming he had a call. And we thought when he left the box, we thought he got 10 minutes for it because of jumping in like that, and that his night might have been over. And instead, he was right back out there the next shift because he didn't get any penalty for it. But that kind of bonding is and there's another instance that I mentioned in the takeaways where Joel Farabee kind of got, I wouldn't call it a late poke, but he's just going to the net trying to play for a rebound. And here comes, and Hathaway's in the middle of that one too. And here comes Ristolainen and Yandel over to support their teammate. And it's, and everybody's over there in that moment. It's not just those two guys. But when you look at the emotion on their faces, like, they're not holding back, and it's the third game of the preseason. So it's nice to see that early on. It's realistically your first game as a team collectively playing the assumed top four lines and the assumed top three defensive pairings. And this is the kind of support that you have for each other. That's really a standout to me in terms of how different it is. This was a difficult team to watch toward the end of the year. And as things started to progress during the offseason, I kind of, whenever I would go on air on 97.3, I would start to sit there and say things like, when Ryan Ellis got acquired, for example, this might be the first of many. This is not just the only new face they're going to get potentially. Don't be surprised if it's 3 or 4 guys potentially. And it turned out to be realistically 6 or 7 in the end. I guess, assuming the number can vary based on if you want to include Nate Thompson in that or not. And so now that we're seeing that product, now that we're actually seeing what these guys, it was a long off season for that regard, because of the fact that you had all this time to sit there and wonder what is it going to look like. And now we're starting to see what it looks like. And it's nice to see what, at least on the very surface of it so far, without going too deep into the actual performance level and the fact that it's preseason, to at least see what looks like a changed locker room.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, when you think about, it'll lead me to a different topic, but there was a second period sequence where the Flyers just owned the puck. I think it was a Couturier line out there with Giroux and Konechny. And that was like, this is the Flyers of of 20, and it was just a great sequence. They hung onto the puck. They were hustling, smart hockey. And of course it ends with that cross-check penalty. And it seems like, Kevin, it's going to have to be something that the players adjust to. And it's going to be a little bit frustrating for fans. I'm just wondering your take on how the players feel about that.
This has been a very popular topic of conversation, at least among us in the press box, over the course of either training camps or as we started to see it in games or whatever. And there's kind of the thought process behind it is that this is going to be a big issue early on in the season. You're going to see it called a lot. You're going to see things like what happened with Konechny in that game, where after the penalty's over, he's going to have a discussion with the officials about, kind of what is it or what was the call, or trying to get an explanation and all that type of stuff. And it's going to kind of go both ways, I think. I think you're going to see the officials kind of crack down on this really hard because that's the instruction, and you're going to see players take a lot of time to adjust to it. And then I think somewhere maybe in about a month or so into the season, you're going to start to see, I think, it meet in the middle. You'll see maybe a few fewer calls on that end as it goes on, but you'll see players also having adjusted to it, so that'll lead to fewer calls as well. So it'll kind of meet in the middle. I don't think it's going to be some big thing that lasts all year, because it does, it really does disrupt the flow of the game a lot. You don't want to see games like we saw kind of with that Boston game on Thursday, where there was so many penalty calls early on in that game that you're going, there's no flow to this game. It was really hard to evaluate 5-on-5 play when every time you turn around there was another penalty being called, and somebody's going on the power play and somebody's going on the penalty kill, and then you're watching two units that either one is, the best power play, one of the best power plays in the league, against a penalty kill unit that's got a bunch of bottom 6 guys on it, or vice versa. It's a power play with guys trying to make a team, and a penalty kill that's going to be out there as the first unit in the regular season. So it's hard to evaluate, and I certainly hope that it does go the way that we all seem to think it will, which is that there's an evening out process, and eventually it'll pull back on the number of calls that we see.
Yeah, that's well, it's kind of like the lockout and some of the adjustments that had to be made there. But right now, it's not exactly seamless, so we'll keep our fingers crossed. There are some players on the bubble because of the injuries that we're looking at, particularly, I wanted to talk about Nick Seeler. He played with the Wild before, so Chuck Fletcher is very familiar with him. Also, Adam Clendening. Those guys are kind of battling out for that number 7 spot because of what happened with Sam Morin and his knee injury. I'm getting good feedback on Nick Seeler, defensive defenseman versus Adam Clendening, more of an offensive guy. It looks like Seeler is more of AV's type of player for that position.
Yeah, I'd say that Seeler's in the lead for that right now, and that's just kind of an indication based on, first and foremost, after playing him in Tuesday's game, playing him again in Thursday's game, that was kind of a sign that he's in the lead a little bit, and he's kind of been more or less exclusively part of that group that we associate with the opening night roster. So I'm not surprised that he's in the lead based off of that. I mean, he had a couple plays in that Tuesday game where I got a sense of, like, kind of you almost want to tell, he is trying to earn a spot, so I get where he's coming from. But at the same time, it's like, settle down for a second, because he's getting out there. He's really sacrificed the body. He was doing a lot of those types of things to stand out, and that's what made him have such a good game, because he was physical, he was blocking shots, and to see that in a preseason game where, yes, you're definitely putting your body on the line in that situation, but he's trying to earn a spot. So I think that for now, that's got him in the lead. I didn't see enough of that from Clendening in terms of, and again, maybe different styles, but I think that what they want to have when it comes down to it is a guy who they can slide into the lineup, who they go, this is someone that can be relied upon in the defensive zone first and foremost, and then anything else from there is kind of bonus at this point. But I would say that that's the first thing they look for, and that's why I think you're going to hold on to him probably as your 7th, because he's a guy who you can plug in at any time if needed. And certainly it's been said multiple times by Alain Vigneault that you need that 7th guy, because sometimes that 7th defenseman plays 50, 60 games in a season because somebody else is hurt, whether it's one of your top guys or whether it's somebody on your third pairing. Somebody might get hurt, and that's why you, at that point in time, you would need to put this guy in, and he can see the games add up really quickly.
Sure. Dan?
Yeah, I mean, it looks to me like, from everything I read, that Sealers, has an edge on that. Hopefully it's not going to come into play. I still wonder if there is an injury, to the top 6, depending on who it is, might be more likely we see someone like a Cam York or something come up. Talking about Morgan Frost a little bit, because you had asked about him. Coming into this season, a lot of people were saying, hey, he hasn't played live hockey in a while. He had the shoulder surgery. He's probably going to need some time in the AHL. So, probably we'll start there. And now all of a sudden with the Kevin Hayes injury, it's looking like he's clearly going to be on this team to start the season. So I think we need to have a little bit of patience. There was some Flyers fans after that first game that Frost played. He wasn't all that great. I thought he made a good play on the power play at one point to help out. But I thought he was a lot better last night. He still wasn't there. I mean, it's going to take some time. But I think I still think we've got to keep in mind that it's been a while since he's played professional hockey, coming off that shoulder injury. So I think that we're going to have to give it some time, and there's really not many other good options. So that's kind of a lot of the chatter I see on Twitter is talking about Morgan Frost. And I just think we have to keep in mind that he is going to need a little bit of time. Yeah,
absolutely. There are some other younger players that are trending in different directions. Connor Bunnaman not really standing out, but kind of by default with the injuries to Wade Allison, Tanner Lashinsky. He looks like he's a favorite to, hang on to that 13th forward spot, whereas players like Cam York and Lena Sandin look like they need a little more time. I guess in the case of York and Sandin, just not quite there yet.
Yeah, a little bit. I'd say, there's a lot of guys who are kind of like that in that sense. I think you just know what you have with Bunnaman, to be honest. I think that it's not like he hasn't been up previously under this coaching staff or with some of these other players that you don't know what he is. And he had success as a fourth-line player kind of toward the end of that 2019-20 season, right before the pause, where he was still pretty much almost a regular part of the lineup into some of those games. So he was starting to get comfortable at that level, and I think that he's another guy who's probably been hurt a little bit by the way that the last year collectively has gone in terms of the amount of games you get into. Frost falls into this category too, where it was, if you were part of that group that kind of just practiced all the time with the team but never got into a playoff game or never got to really play much at the start of the season or that shortened 2021 season, and then now you're trying to kind of reestablish where you are. So I think they do feel like they know what they've got in him to an extent. He does need to try to stand out a little more, but certainly he's probably holding on to that 13th spot right now when you consider some of the other guys that are injured right now and who's going to have to fill the void. I think Morgan Frost was going to be kind of competing for that spot to a degree. It could have been a more veteran guy who you could have pulled down in there and tried to get either Frost in there, or Wade Allison was going to compete for a spot, or somebody like that. And now I think you're just looking for somebody who, again, you can rely on, who you don't feel like you need to play every game, quite honestly, and that you can let sit for a game or two or three and feel like he's still getting something effective out of the practice time and everything like that. But I think that I'd agree with a lot of the assessment on him. He hasn't really completely stood out. I didn't think he had a particularly good game on Tuesday night either, when he played alongside of guys like Tyson Forrester, and could have been better for sure. That line got kind of hemmed in their zone an awful lot early on, and I think it kind of just carried over throughout the game, that it was a little bit of a struggle, and he admitted that afterwards too. So I think that's a good thing for him to kind of know that there's another level for him as well in that role.
Yeah, absolutely. What about Tyson Forster? Is he a shoo-in for the AHL as opposed to the CHL?
It's a good question, because I'm still not completely sure what the situation is for him. I assume that they're allowing these players to continue to play at the AHL level if they got the experience last year. And I that's where I would put him, to be honest. I think that he's the type of player, the best way I can describe him right now is he's too good for the OHL again, and he's not good enough yet to be in the NHL just yet, because it's just a little bit with the pace and trying to keep up a little bit that you see just a few of the struggles for him at the NHL level. But I think that he is a perfect fit for the AHL, and that time there could really benefit him. So I think that he's right in that spot right now where this year could be a big one for him in his development, because he is a younger guy playing in the AHL and made the adjustment pretty well. I mean, he got toward the end of that season in the AHL last year. He got hot at the right time and was putting together some really good numbers in consecutive games, and that's a big deal for him. And I think that he can take some of that confidence from playing at that level, certainly some of the confidence as well from being part of the NHL group for a lot of this training camp, to be honest. I mean, he had a really good rookie camp. He was starting to stand out, and it's nice to see that he's also standing out on the radar of the coaches as well, because he's definitely opened some eyes with his development from one year to the next. And I certainly think that he should be down in the AHL to start, but certainly also with the way his progression has gone so quickly from being drafted to debuting in the AHL right away because of everything going on with the CHL, to possibly being that one call away from the NHL whenever they decide they may want him if he impresses enough.
Absolutely. Dan?
Yeah, I agree on Forster. I mean, I think that if you could have, scripted the perfect development scenario from when they drafted him, I think that's kind of where we are. I mean, one of the big question marks with him was his skating. I don't notice it at all. I mean, I don't see issues with his skating at all. They've said the same things about Bobby Brink. When I watch him play, last year, I still kind of saw a little bit of it. I don't think it's really going to hinder Brink all that much. But with Forster, talked about his skating, he looked fantastic to me from a skating perspective. He's not a burner, but he certainly, I don't think his skating was a hindrance especially considering the kind of game that he plays. And he was, pretty good in the AHL last year. One of their better players, especially towards the middle and latter stages of the year. I think we're seeing now that he's not quite yet ready for the NHL, but he's a guy who, I think, agree with Kevin. I think he'll be in the AHL this year, and he'll probably put up some good numbers there. That power play should be pretty good for the Phantoms, with Cam York on the point, and some folks that'll be able to set up Forster's one-timer from the slot. So yeah, I think his development curve has been ideal so far for this team. One thing I wanted to mention was Martin Jones was dreadful in the game on, Tuesday? And people were just going ballistic on Twitter. Oh, my God, they should have kept Elliott. Jones is a disaster. The one thing you got to keep in mind with Martin Jones is that even the years that he's been pretty good, he's always been a very streaky goalie, and he'll let in goals. He let in a short side top shelf goal that was from past the faceoff dot. They said it was deflected, but it was still one of the worst goals I've seen in a while. But he was pretty good last night, and I think that was another good sign. He's gonna be a guy who is gonna be a little bit streaky, But I just wanted to mention, that I thought that he was pretty decent last night, and that's as we head towards the regular season, that's going to be important, getting him into some form.
Definitely. Kevin, the thing with Martin Jones, you're just crossing your fingers that the whole season, the elephant in the room is Carter Hart and his performance. Because even with a rebound season, Martin Jones is not the kind of guy that can carry the Flyers to any kind of real success. But it is good to see him look like the kind of goalie that'll make those momentum saves, keep the team in the game, get his 30 games in, and give them a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's a lot of guys. I think kind of the theme of the offseason to me as it kind of drew to an end was you're making bets on a lot of players. You're making, a bet on Rasmus Ristolainen when he leaves Buffalo and goes to a new situation. Is that going to help his game? You're making a bet on low-risk signings like Keith Yandel and Derek Brassard and what they can do. And Martin Jones is certainly one of those bets because, again, it's not a long-term bet. It's a one-year contract. So you're making a short-term bet on him, but also at the same time, it's the position that matters the most, obviously, and you're putting him behind Carter Hart as your first line behind him in the sense that if anything happens, whether it's an injury or whether it's performance-based with Carter Hart, this is the guy who you would have to lean on. And certainly the one advantage that Jones gives you that Brian Elliott didn't, at least in my opinion, is that Brian Elliott's no longer the guy you can throw out there for 4 games in a row without pretty much running him into the ground. Jones, at least, I think, has more durability than Brian Elliott does at this stage of his career. That said, certainly I don't want to have to sit there and if I'm one of the coaches on the Flyers, if I'm Chuck Fletcher, you don't want this coming down to Martin Jones. You just want to have Carter Hart be the guy that you saw 2 seasons ago, and that's the end of story. So I think that that's really the biggest bet of the offseason is here's the new contract for Carter Hart, here's the vote of confidence that he can be that guy, and certainly his debut was very impressive. That was the guy I remember seeing 2 seasons ago and and had glimpses of in that previous season as well, where he had some really good games in between some of the rough ones that he had. It's the guy who is tracking really well, the guy who seems to always be following the play, who always seems to be square to the shooter, confident in his abilities. That's the guy I want to see. And as long as that continues to happen, and by all accounts, as I'm talking to you guys and we're getting ready for the next preseason game on Monday night, that game does belong to Carter Hart. So certainly that's the next opportunity we have to see what he has and how he plays. And if it's anything like his debut, then I think that people are going to be really excited about what they see because it'll be 2 games in a row where you've seen him play like the guy that you remember, like the guy that made you want to put these games on and just see what he does. It almost didn't even matter what the rest of them did because they would find ways to win games because they were scoring 2 goals because he was that good. So that's, I think, the guy you want to see. And that really, to me, is the biggest bet of this season is that he will be that guy.
And that should come tomorrow night. He should be starting the whole game, you think, against the Bruins?
That's exactly what the plan is. And Alain Vigneault had already said that Jones had started Saturday, Hart starting the Monday game. Jones is going to start the Tuesday road game against the Islanders, and then I would assume that Hart's going to get that Friday game against Washington, which I think is actually a really good plan for 2 reasons. One, it's going to give each goalie a chance to face all 3 of the teams that they played in the preseason for at least a little bit. Hart got 2 periods against the Islanders, and Jones got 2 periods against Boston, or a period and a half against Boston. And it's also setting you up for, let's be real, there is no question who the starting goalie is on opening night on October 15th. It's going to be Carter Hart. And if that's the case, then I kind of want to see Carter Hart play that last preseason game with a week to go so that this way he's not sitting around after playing 1, 3, and 5, let's say, if they would have started him on Saturday instead, that he's not playing a game that's a week and a half away from his next game. He's just got a week in between and the usual practice time, and he kind of goes in knowing where he stands. So I think it was the perfect way to execute that plan, and that sets him up nicely to be right on track to go into the regular season with the goalie rotation that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I also, taking a look at, last year, the Boston game was the one where we saw Carter flip out a little bit. So maybe there's some symmetry and some mind healing that is going on, even though it's an exhibition game. Face the Bruins. The Bruins will, I don't know what kind of lineup they're going to have. Just the idea that he could have a good performance and kind of put last year behind him in a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that there's an element of that to the preseason as well because of the fact that when you didn't have this a year ago or last season, and you're trying to prepare for a shortened season where every game matters right off the bat, and you don't get that preparation time. Like, it almost allows you. He gave up one goal in that game against the Islanders before he was out after the 2 periods, and then he's able to let that situation or how he's feeling, it kind of rolls off his back a little bit, because it's a game that in the grand scheme of things doesn't matter like that. It's more just about preparing, and if he felt good, and he certainly did. And that was the feeling that Jones had as well after the Saturday game. The first one didn't go so well, and the save percentage doesn't look good, and he had at least had one goal he should have stopped, and yet he comes out and he has a really good game in the second one, and now it's all of a sudden the mindset changes. He feels better about his performance. He's expressing that he feels more in a rhythm, and that's what the purpose of the preseason is. So it's good to see them balancing out this goalie workload. And I'm actually really a big fan also of them giving these guys full games 3-4 games into the preseason, so that they have a couple of games where they get to just play the whole thing out and be in net for a full 60 to really see what it feels like again after having this much time between games. I think that's a big deal for them, especially when so much hinges on your goaltending.
Oh, you bet. Dan?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of get the sense that after what happened last season, that they know that they need to start strong, and they've got the first 2 games are against Vancouver, who just signed their 2 superstar players, Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson, and Seattle. And you hope that you'd be able to beat both of those 2 teams at home. I think they understand how important it is for this team to get off to a good start. So I think that has a lot to do with why they're so quickly getting to, what they think that their starting roster is going to be headed into the season, which is, why they basically played the entire starting lineup last night.
Yeah. I'm wondering, Kevin, like, how often, when we talked about players like Bunnaman and other players that are competing for some of those last spots, they're going to guess, I would think they would spot him in for guys like Thompson and other players. But do you really want to play your stars each of the games? Maybe it'll split the squads up. What do you think?
I wouldn't be surprised if they do for the next 2, just because for a back-to-back, I don't know if you want to push guys that hard, or certain guys anyway. I almost wouldn't be surprised if somebody like, say, Morgan Frost is playing the rest of the preseason at this point, because he could use the games and use the ice time. But certainly I wouldn't expect to see Sean Couturier out there for all 3 that are left. I think that you're going to probably get another against Washington again on Friday, another similar lineup, just because it's the last game of the preseason. By that point, I believe the Phantoms will have started their preseason schedule and their camp and all that type of stuff. So you're going to see cuts come somewhere in here pretty soon, whether it happens actually in between the games themselves, or whether it's right after that Tuesday night ends, and that way they have 5 games out of 6 in the books, and they're able to separate the rosters at that point and really decide what they want to do. But I do think that you're going to have to find a little bit of balance with certain guys, but at the same time, you do want to keep, I think, this group out there. I thought that when they played the full lineup in that Saturday game, it reminded me of a couple years ago when it's Alain Vigneault's first season as the Flyers head coach, and he goes through maybe 3 games out of a 7 or 8 game preseason, and then decides, we're making cuts now because these veteran guys need to play right now, and I need them to get ready and get into the right rhythm and get the chemistry with each other before we get going in the regular season. And granted, that was a little bit of a different preseason because of the fact that they did have the trip over to Switzerland and then Czech Republic to start the season. But at the same time, there was an emphasis on getting some of those guys more ice time early on. And I felt like after watching the way that the game in Boston was with the lopsided lineups, the way that they were, Boston playing basically close to a regular lineup, the Flyers not doing so in that game, I thought that was possibly a sign that this was coming, that they were going to play a lineup that resembles their opening night lineup more often in the near future. And I certainly think that that's going to happen at least after Tuesday with Friday's game. I think that after they get through this back-to-back, they're going to make roster cuts anyway. But I wouldn't be surprised with one more home game left, too, if you don't see a lot of the same faces again. Especially, that might also play into why Alain Vigneault said after the game last night, Sunday was an off day. Instead of it being the usual, they were going to have a skate in the morning, I believe, and they just canceled the whole thing, said it's an off day because they've been on the ice for so many days and they're getting ready for this back-to-back. And I wonder if that has to do with the potential of playing that same lineup on Monday night for another home game, because it's easy to do. It's easy to play all of your regulars at home in the preseason, where they don't have to travel with the team, don't have to travel on, say, a bus or take a quick plane ride wherever they're going and get there. It's much more likely that you'll see the younger guys go and take that kind of trip day of than some of the veteran guys, even though there's a requirement for veteran players in these preseason games. But I think that we'll see it within reason for maybe Tuesday's game, but I think Monday and Friday could be a very close to that potential opening night roster again.
Yeah, they go to Bridgeport, Connecticut to play the Islanders. I didn't want to go too deep into this, but it's kind of on Twitter right now, and we don't have a lot of information, but anything you'd like to share about some of the allegations made by Robin Lehner? Anything you care to comment about?
It's tough because this is all really unfolded within the last 24 hours. I believe that some of the Lehner tweets came out right around the time we were actually sitting downstairs waiting for some of the players in press conferences. And it was just very on the surface at the moment. There's a lot to dissect there and a lot to try to consider. And realistically, I don't know much more than anybody else does at this point. About all I got is about the same as everybody's seen, which is we've seen Robin Lehner's tweets at this point. We've seen the request from the NHL to talk with Rob about this, and we've seen the statement that the Flyers released from general manager Chuck Fletcher about those allegations. And that's pretty much all we've got for right now. I'm certain that this is not going away anytime soon. There's going to be more layers to this as the days and any other time passes with this and trying to figure out how far and how deep this goes, because it is a serious allegation, no question about it. It's just a matter of trying to get the details. Robin Lehner saying that there's proof that he has, but not necessarily sharing the proof. So what is that proof? There's too many questions left to be answered right now, but I certainly would hope that this gets resolved in a way that kind of works out for everybody in terms of that you get proper answers. We've seen in my opinion anyway, we've seen too many situations like this around the NHL in general where we have a lot of questions about something off the ice. We have questions, Evander Kane's news comes up, and we have questions about what's going on there. The Chicago Blackhawks, what's going on there? The Montreal Canadiens being in the news because they drafted a player in the first round who was convicted in his home country and had asked specifically, don't draft me, I don't deserve it, and did anyway, and they face backlash for that. So there's a lot of inner workings that we've seen where there's situations around the league where this happens, and I think that the NHL needs to do something to step in to at least try to not gloss over these issues and to at least try to provide some clarity. That's about where my thoughts are at this point. I don't know anything specifically from the Flyers angle of this that would be going on. I don't think any of us have any idea. I think we're just waiting to see what happens, and if there is an investigation, if there's not, if Robin Lehner continues. His Twitter account has been quiet since last night, since all this kind of started to come out. So we'll see where it goes, but it's certainly something that you can't just push aside at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, he's a volatile personality, has a history of overcoming some things, and he's someone I feel good about in a lot of ways. But when we're talking about distributing tranquilizers from non-physicians, which is more or less the allegation, we got to wait to see what happens with that in terms of an investigation. Dan?
So just to give some more context, so Robin Lehner, who's a goaltender for the Vegas Golden Knights, he's very public in talking about his struggles with bipolar disorder and depression, and he will often go on Twitter and tweet things out that I'd say that a lot of professional athletes or hockey players wouldn't, just in terms of not whistleblowing, but he's not afraid to kind of take people on sometimes, and sometimes you wonder if he's what mental state he's doing when he's tweeting these things out. But so last night he tweeted out, is it common for workplaces to give out benzodiazepines to employees when they travel and Ambien? Should that not be done by doctors or psychiatrists? Asking for a friend. This doesn't happen in Vegas, to be clear, but I know many other teams. I also have been on teams that do, ? Hashtag Philadelphia Flyers, dinosaur coach, treating people robots, not human. Fire these dinosaurs. Fire Vino, first story. I got proof. Try to shake your way out of this one. So as you said, he's kind of alluding to the fact that from what he's been told, that the Flyers and or Alain Vigneault or whatever are doing something with Ambien to members of the team instead of doctors, and so, of course, on Twitter, and, I'm not a professional hockey reporter, so I don't have as much to lose as someone like, Kevin or any of the professionals who might comment on this, or all of the, the people on Twitter who don't get paid to work on, hockey for a living. So, of course, a lot of people are speculating, Nolan Patrick just went from the Flyers to Vegas. Does this have something to do with Nolan Patrick being there? Has Nolan Patrick talked to Robin Lehner? Obviously, we have no way of knowing what's actually going on. But one of my issues with what Robin Lehner tweeted out was that by tweeting this out and then not following up with any kind of proof, he's basically, you've got all these people assuming that it's Nolan Patrick that's talked to him. And it's actually, I don't like Nolan Patrick. This is not really fair to Nolan Patrick, especially if he's not the person who said stuff to Robin Lehner, because the way that Robin Lehner put this out there, he had to know that people were going to assume that it was Nolan Patrick. And by, he came on with kind of like a tweet afterwards saying like, Nolan Patrick's a new teammate of mine. This is, not to do with that, but not really a firm denial. So it's kind of irresponsible of him to go onto Twitter and put something like this out there unless he's willing to follow through with what his proof is. And the league basically apparently said that they've invited him to make a official comment to them about the situation. It's a very tricky scenario because look, I used to work in minor league hockey. I traveled with the team. I was on the bus after the games. Let me just say that after the games on the bus, our trainer would go up and down the aisles handing out painkillers, prescription painkillers to players. He offered them to me. Hey, Bookie, that was my nickname because I was always betting on horse racing on the bus. Hey, Bookie, have a Percocet. Here you go. Like, come on, everyone's doing it. So if you're going to tell me that like NHL teams are doing stuff like this, like, I mean, I don't know. It seems like something that could be going on, but are you really going to open the doors to like talking about this with everyone? If Robin Lehner comes out and makes like an official accusation, it's a really tough situation. And it's why I don't think that Robin Lehner is going to make any official complaints to the NHL, because if he does, he's basically made an enemy of all the NHL teams, a lot of NHL players. It's a very difficult situation. And you saw, as Kevin said, the Flyers came out with a very brief, it was like a 2 or 3 sentence statement. Sam Carchidi tweeted it out. The statement was from Chuck Fletcher: "The health and well-being of our players is our top priority, and any care provided to them comes from the team's healthcare professionals, not the coaching staff. We have no reason to believe any of our players have received improper care." Again, it's a pretty carefully worded quote from Chuck Fletcher. I mean, the bottom line is no one wants to lose their job. No one wants to get sued. And I think I don't think it's just going to go away, but like, I'll be surprised if there is official backlash from this outside of backlash towards Robin Lehner. So, again, it's a tough thing to talk about, but it is kind of what everyone's been talking about the last day on Twitter in Flyers fandom.
Yeah, I wanted to tread carefully to kind of indemnify Kevin because you work for an outlet, and we don't want to. There's nothing you said that crossed the line, so we respect that because you got to get everything official. But what Dan shared is something he experienced, so we just have to wait and see. I sold hypnotics. There's different kinds of benzodiazepines, and Ambien is technically not one, but the bottom line is these are medications that should only be prescribed by a doctor, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens with it. Tread carefully, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the thing that kind of the only thing I'll say that was a little unusual to me about it, and this is not trying to downplay what Robin Lehner's trying to say in this at all. It's just I think that mentioning one team and one coach is a little suspicious. And then saying you have proof, but also mentioning there's many teams that do this. So why not call out the other teams as well? Like if for as refreshing as a player's honesty may be about the situation, and if this is a problem around the league and he knows that, then sure, your honesty in putting out information that can come to light and maybe eventually be discovered and be more true, that's why I'm not really talking much about anything. We're all just kind of speculating where it goes and just kind of sitting back to see what unfolds. But if it does turn out to be something with more teams involved potentially, or more coaches or whatever, then certainly that why not, like, if you're on a roll like that kind of, and he's been on a roll with more than just that little portion of his tweets from the previous night. He's talked about the Buffalo Sabres, and he was a member of the Buffalo Sabres, and he commented on Jack Eichel's situation and things like that. So he's kind of gone on a roll with his perception of the way things are when it comes to health and safety in the league, and yet mentions many teams and then only calls out one. That was the only thing I felt was a little unusual, and I would have almost liked to have seen that there's more to it than that. Like someone who's going to sit there and say, well, here's an example, and here's another, and here's another, and I've got proof on all of it, rather than just one team. That for what it's worth, as much as, again, and Dan said it, the speculation that the obvious connection could be Nolan Patrick, because that's the connection that people can assume from Philadelphia to Vegas and being a teammate or whatever. I'm sure that people around the league as a player for as many years as he's been in the league, to be able to comment on a bunch of situations and say things about that, and yet the only team he picks is a team he's never played for and a coach he's never played for. That was the only thing I found to be a little suspicious about it, and that doesn't mean that he's wrong. It just means I kind of would have almost liked to have seen the proof in a way. Like, if you're going to follow it up, go ahead and show your proof. Yet at the same time, I think that that's where the NHL can also step in and try to just put this thing to bed in a way where you do clear up this thing. You get concrete evidence. I mean, this just happened with Evander Kane, where they were talking about the gambling allegations, and they do an investigation, and it comes back and says we have no evidence that he bet on his own team's games. So the issue kind of goes to bed until another one kind of comes in, and it's something different around him. But it nonetheless, you can put the gambling one aside because there was an investigation done, and now it was handled by the league, essentially, or even by a third party in association with the league. That, I think, is what probably needs to happen here just to get this cleared up, because it is a very serious allegation, and I think that that's why we need answers.
No, I agree. I think that whether he's right or wrong, Robin, well, especially if he's wrong, but I think he's being a loose cannon here. Here's a guy who's a goaltender, starting goaltender on a team that has an excellent chance to be a Stanley Cup finalist, and he just supplanted a very popular player, and he's going to really be in the spotlight. Now, I would think he'd want to keep a lower profile and be a little bit more mature about the whole thing. And if he has something, be a little bit more into QT, go through agents or, some other way of doing this than through Twitter, which has been correctly described as a cesspool. I should also add that Dan Carcillo was someone who's also been very outspoken about player safety and things like that. And Alain Vigneault was one of the coaches. I saw somebody tweeted something out that Dan said that that's a professional coach. He knows how to talk to his players and treat his players and things like that. So, Dan, I'll leave you with the last word on that.
No, just because you mentioned that, I retweeted a Dan Carcillo tweet from March, because some people were talking about Carcillo as a friend of Lehner, and maybe this is where he's getting it from, and maybe he is, but Carcillo tweeted out in March that he'd had the pleasure of playing for all these great NHL coaches, and he listed Alain Vigneault on the list. So, makes it a little hard for me to believe that it might be coming from him. So I thought it was interesting to go back and see that tweet from Carcillo.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, let's wrap it there, Kev, because you've been so great, and we got an exciting season coming up. But before we let you go, just one last question. Do you think that this is basically the Flyers team that we're going to see that opens up October 15th? You don't expect any last-second, maybe minor trades, maybe if Frost doesn't impress and they want to say, hey, let's get another Brassard clone or something to kind of fill that spot. What's your gut feeling on that?
I'd say that this is the team you're going to see. That was as soon as I saw the Saturday lineup, that was my impression. This is the opening night roster right here, pretty much. And yet, at the same time, I never put anything past Chuck Fletcher after this offseason. I really don't. Every time that I've thought that he had no resources left to do anything like that, the cap wasn't going to allow him to do something, he's found a way to do something else. And there were multiple times this offseason, maybe early on, not so much, when he made the trade for Ellis, the Gostisbehere trade, the Ristolainen trade, the Voracek for Atkinson trade. Like, all that happened, and it all kind of fit within the cap. And then signing Keith Yandel, signing Nate Thompson, signing Martin Jones, re-signing the RFAs that he had to re-sign, and then all of a sudden there's still room for Derek Brassard, and there's still, every time I thought that there was something else that he wasn't going to be able to do, he found a way to do it, right down to the 2 contract extensions for Sean Couturier and Joel Farabee before the end of the offseason. So I never put anything past him, but I do think that they're satisfied with where they are. I think it's probably at this point a little too close to that. I think at the very least they would want to give Morgan Frost that chance to be the guy in that spot and see where it goes with Kevin Hayes' recovery, to see what happens down the road with some of the other guys as well. I mean, certainly they've got a lot of injuries they're dealing with, and they're working through it. But definitely, I think this is the group that you're going to see when they take on the Vancouver Canucks. And I do think that because of the number of new faces, it's certainly exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, Kevin, where can people find you on social media and all the projects that you are involved with?
Absolutely. So my personal Twitter is at Kevin_Durso, so you can just follow me there. That's where you'll get anything, game updates, quotes from the pressers, anything like that. The outlets are at 973 ESPN, at Flyerdelphia, at Sports Talk PHL. That's all. The Flyerdelphia and Sports Talk Philly are all under the same umbrella. And the at YWT Podcast. I'm actually getting ready to go record that in a couple minutes. So it's going to be fun to be talking about a lot of other stuff. I'm sure we'll mention a couple of the other things we talked about just not too long ago on the show, but at the same time, we're going to be talking a lot about these roster battles, the new guys, how everybody's been doing, and it's going to be great to get this going now that we actually have games to talk about. I've been excited to get back into things. I kind of was enjoying that little break that we had after kind of some of the last signings of the offseason, and that maybe 2 or 3 weeks left in August that we had, and then rookie camp started, and I kind of got the bug again, and that was exactly the way it should be. You start to see players on the ice, and you're ready to go, and I'm ready to go to bring some good coverage this year, and hopefully more positive stuff, because last year was not really fun to cover because it was just that kind of year, and it was disappointing to see what was happening, but there's a new energy around, and it's good to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Kevin, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you guys for having me. Always a pleasure.
You take care now. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So, Dan, once again, Skype has accused me of kicking Kevin off the call.
I saw that. You're so rude.
Yeah, it's terrible. Hey, before we wrap up with one more thing here about TNT's fail, that broadcast was hilarious, but not really, depending on where you're situated with that. Just a reminder about Jim South Street, sponsor for the O&B Puckcast and FlyersNittyGritty.com. Hey, listen, 40 years of the greatest cheesesteaks, hoagies, and fries in the grandest Philadelphia tradition. You got to have it. And if you live down...
I'm going to be there. Jim's is the absolute best. I'm going to be up in Philly for a bunch of hockey games and football games in mid-October. And, man, I can't wait to get that Jim's cheesesteak.
400 South Street. You got to be there. But you know what? If you live down there and you can't quite make it, don't worry. They use DoorDash, and they'll get that delicious food right to your door. So if you need that cheesesteak, with or without, doesn't matter. Just go to Jim South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia, PA. And Dan?
How do you get your cheesesteak, Isaiah?
I get it plain without.
Really?
Yes. I do not like cheese. I am a strange bird.
So only the steak, no cheese, no onions.
If it's that kind of Jim's, like the classic South Philadelphia type, I get only the steak. I love it.
Do you put ketchup on or
nothing?
No?
Nothing.
Wow.
Now there are other types of steaks, like the Northeast Philly kind of steak. I like pickles, but that's it.
Okay.
You're talking to somebody that doesn't eat pizza. So I'm a really strange bird.
That's fine. I'm gonna be. I got a great schedule coming up. I'm going to the wife got for my birthday. She got Flyers Caps preseason game. That's on the 8th, so we're gonna go to that.
Oh, great!
And then Thursday the 14th, I'm going to the Eagles Bucks, and then the 15th, I'm going to Flyers opening night, and then 18th, I'm going to Flyers Kraken, and then I'm going out to Vegas, and I'm going to the Eagles Vegas game the 24th. I get a great October coming up. So
yes, you do. Wow.
Yeah.
And you can give us your impressions. It could be like half a reporter.
Yeah, I'm gonna mix in some. Definitely get some Jim's cheesesteaks when I'm up there in Philly. 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to check that out. So just the last thing before we go, that Boston game with TNT. Now I don't know if that was the first broadcast or not. I don't know if there have been previous ones, but they had problems all over the place. You had like an old 70s style vertical hold issue. Then they lost the connection. They had funky camera angles because one of the cameras obviously went out. And then segments in between periods were clumsy. It was a bit of a pratfall.
Yeah, it was, that's what the preseason is for, right? I figured that's why they were going to do some preseason games to try and get the kinks out. But I'm sure they'll figure it out. It's just technical issues. They'll get it buttoned up. I like, ESPN Plus is now, the official streaming provider of the NHL.
Yes.
And I like it because it's half the price of NHL.tv, and you get all the ESPN games in addition to all the hockey games. So I'm happy with the transition to ESPN because for me living in DC, that ESPN Plus is going to really help me out watching the games.
Oh yeah, I'm an ESPN Plus guy too. I'm a big boxing fan, so there's a lot there for me in college football, and so that's a good deal. And I think we're going to really see the difference. And I miss Gary Thorne, but hey, we can't have everything, right?
Right.
So we're going to wrap it right there. Dan, where can people catch you on Twitter?
You can find me on Twitter at dsilver88.
Fantastic. Talk with Dan, and we'll give you some knowledge like he laid down tonight as usual. I'm Isaiah, at Isaiah on Twitter, ISAIAH_520. Isaiah, don't forget the _520. And, of course, catch the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck on Twitter. We're on Gab. Not too many people interact with us there. But I'm trying to get the biggest segment. I just want to say thanks, by the way. We have really seen a tremendous amount of growth and hit a new plateau and broken through a plateau with our listenership recently. I think we have the strongest team we've ever had. And I think it's reflected with your listenership, but we really appreciate it. And if you could show that appreciation by subscribing to the podcast on any one of the 12 or 13 platforms, including YouTube, Apple, SoundCloud, you name it, and give us a review on Apple Podcasts. 5-star review. Next one we get, we'll definitely read it on air. We appreciate that. So until next time, which would be Monday the 11th, we're going to have Charlie O'Connor from The Athletic on for our season preview, and we'll see if anything goes down between now and then. But until then, take care, everybody.